I just saw Captain Marvel, and I liked it a lot more than I thought I would. It's nothing too groundbreaking, but it's certainly not going to be the end of Marvel as some people, mostly men, have said. It's better than Ant-Man and the Wasp was, it's better than the first two Thor movies, it's probably one of the better, pretty okay Marvel movies. That's not to mention that Ant-Man, Thor, Captain America, Doctor Strange all had super formulaic and run-of-the-mill first movies, and took a few appearances to really settle into their roles. That being said, it's very understandable why some people won't like this movie at all. And if you saw it and thought it was uninspired or boring, then I can kind of see where you're coming from, but not in any ways that other Marvel movies haven't suffered from. It does drag in parts. I wish they'd leant harder into the 90s synth-style soundtrack. They seemed afraid to really commit to it and mostly settled for a generic, serviceable superhero score. But basically, I still thought it was fine, and you might disagree, and that's cool. Although I will say, if you think saying it goes against the canon or has plot holes is good criticism, then you should be buried in some sand. And spoilers, I guess, but the same goes for people complaining that the cat ruined Marvel because they took something cool and badass like Nick Fury saying, "Last time I trusted someone, I lost an eye," and they made it into a joke. But what I mainly want to tackle here is the reasons that people who haven't seen the movie will dislike it, who never will see the movie because they're busy watching Alita Battle Angel, a movie that deals with the real issues. Captain Marvel has already out-earned Alita, by the way. Another successful boycott, you absolute fucking tools. Ultimately, I think engaging with them is more fun, because it involves talking about politics, which I might as well get out of the way now while my channel is still young. And another thing, this video might come across as a little bit strawman-ish, and to an extent, it is. I'm trying to condense a bunch of arguments I've seen into something I can dissect, and since these are just YouTube comments and tweets, you might think, well, who cares? But what I want to get across here is two things. One, a Marvel fan prejudging this movie because of things Brie Larson has said is more than likely very hypocritical. And two, if you're the kind of person who thinks they can remove an artist from their art, which I don't think is entirely possible or necessary, then you're probably not engaging with the MCU on any level below the complete surface. Also, look, I didn't want to be the person to say this, but if Captain Marvel is too political for you, then your framework for analysing movies could probably do with a bit of a tune-up. There really wasn't as much feminism as people were making out in this movie. Bear in mind I'm not an expert in any of this stuff, by the way. And some more story spoilers here. It's about a very powerful woman who was taken advantage of and gaslit into helping a tyrannical race of warrior aliens. I've seen people say Carol Danvers has no arc since she starts powerful and ends powerful. And that's just not true. If you're judging it by strength, then she does end the movie physically stronger for one thing. But the more important evolution is that she's learned to be her own person. She was super into the whole Kree space warrior hero ideology. The first 30 minutes she seems almost brainwashed in her dedication to fight and get stronger to help what she thinks are her people. But after the final confrontation with Jude Law, he tries goading her into a fistfight, telling her not to use her powers and to prove herself by doing space jujitsu on him. But instead she just gay blasts him and tells him she has nothing to prove to him. And that's a pretty good character arc. And it's only really political if you think a woman having an arc in a superhero movie is a political move. As for the politics in the story itself, it's your standard sci-fi coded warring races, where the glorious powerful heroes are shown to be evil colonizers. The kind of quote-unquote feminism people expected to see from this movie does happen once, I think, when a man tells her to smile and she steals his bike. That's the misandry people are complaining about in this movie, and it's completely justified. This movie is cancelled by men. #mansold. That's not to downplay the fundamentally female story that Carol has, of course. She has to constantly prove herself throughout her life, as shown in the flashbacks and in the trailers, where she keeps falling over and getting back up. Now, if you're against politics in movies, then the MCU, as milquetoast as a lot of its takes can be, is probably not for you. See, it has a similar problem that Bright and Green Book had. It's capable of making statements about society and government, but it usually chalks it up to the actions of individual bad actors. That's bad actors as in people doing bad stuff, and not John Malkovich in Bird Box.
Because some of us don't understand the concept of rationing.
The military-industrial complex costs billions of taxpayer dollars, and sees sectors like education and healthcare cut to feed its insatiable appetite for destruction. Tony Stark was a vital cog in that war machine. That's a joke. He sells weapons and he revels in the riches that it nets him, until he's almost killed by one of his creations. Then he sees the side of the arms race that he was likely aware of, but turned a blind eye to, and vows to fix the damage that he's done. So that's almost a statement, calling the war economy harmful, kind of. It likely could have gone a lot further with Tony using his riches to lobby against illegal arms deals, but it just so happens that the US military helps fund and ultimately has to okay these movies. In return, Marvel gets to put cool tanks and jets in their films, so it's win-win. On a related note, it's probably good that in the same few weeks the Trump administration rolled back the need for the military to disclose civilian casualties on drone strikes, a movie comes out that just viscerally sucks off the Air Force. So when you see a YouTube video of an angry man talking about how they keep putting politics into his superhero escapism, like this one, where he says exactly that about 10 seconds in, know that they're either ignorant of how the language of politics in cinema works, or they're acting in bad faith and judging this movie by a different metric, like perhaps because the main character isn't a man. And as a side note, it gives me an unhealthy amount of joy seeing the people who were so confident Captain Marvel would tank that they made 20-minute videos on how the multi-billion-dollar blue-chip company should have taken marketing advice from them. And now they're either doubling down in the face of the movie's pretty excellent box office results by saying it's fake news and paid Disney bots, or accepting that they were wrong, but still also somehow right. Please, Father, I crave the serotonin. Marvel actors have been political activists for years. Look at Mark Ruffalo. He's always talking about global warming, refugee rights, or the big one, feminism. Same for Chris Evans. When he's not bodying Trump 5 times a day on Twitter, he likes to engage in a bit of the old ultra-activism. Is that a bit of a double standard that now Brie Larson is talking about politics, it's suddenly an issue and we should boycott these movies? That's not for me to say. But wait, you might say, you're not bothered by that kind of politics. You know, the actual policy and government stuff. You don't mind that Captain America distrusts the government and knows that corruption runs rampant in the highest parts of society. That's all just storytelling. What I do hate is gender and identity politics. I don't have a problem with diversity, but this is essentially the very 2019 way of saying I don't see race, or I only see one race, the human race. Only now it's to do with gender and not skin colour. Who decides what is and is not forced diversity? This is a movie about a female comic book character. It's not about a black Iron Man, and it's not about a white Black Panther, which, you know, we all want. I've always had a bit of an issue with this idea that we don't mind female characters, we just don't like it when a female character assumes the role of a male character. Write your own characters. I mean, that on the surface seems fine and plausible. It's good when you can make new, strong female characters. But comic books are unique in that they have legacy characters. Someone like Captain America can be anyone. Steve Rogers was the first embodiment, but he passes his shield down to Bucky Barnes or Sam Wilson, a black Captain America. It doesn't matter who he is, it's the ideals that he represents. So when Riri Williams, a 15-year-old girl, takes over the mantle of Tony Stark, that's not forcing diversity. That's passing the mantle on, and it's been going on for so long. That was a bit of an unscripted tangent, I apologise. We will get back to the topic now. I imagine Marvel was fanning the flames that Brie Larson was causing with her comments, but look, when Brie Larson says she wants more diversity on her press junket, or that this isn't a movie for white men, she's making a point. She said these for a reason that H-Bomber Guy covered really well in his video on woke marketing. The filmmakers and writers likely didn't make this movie for white men, or rather, to appeal specifically to white men, and that's fine. But this does feed into my final point that gender politics has been in the MCU before, you just didn't engage with it. Steve Rogers' origin is essentially a middle finger to toxic masculinity. He's physically weak, but he's 100% heart. He wasn't chosen for the Super Soldier Project because he was the strongest, most manly man. In fact, he was chosen specifically because he was the opposite of that, since, like the scientist said, it amplifies the good as well as the bad, essentially saying that unchecked masculinity can be nothing but destructive. How about a more recent example from Thor Ragnarok? Taika Waititi is a phenomenal director and an all-round great guy who knows that the ultra-masculine appearance of comic book characters is inherently kind of silly. Remember in the Avengers when these two get a moment of silence together after being badass and Hulk punches Thor? And it's funny because the big man did the punch. Taika's way of bringing comedy between these two is to have them sit down and talk about their feelings. And just because it's played for laughs doesn't make it any less sincere. They share a tender moment of bonding because they tried to settle things with muscles and shouting and it didn't work. That's not to mention the subtext of Ragnarok being incredibly anti-colonization. Asgard amassed their wealth and power through conquest, and then Odin suddenly tried to bury that past because he was ashamed of the empire that he built on the back of the dead. But no one was raising a fuss about that, saying, oh, let's go see fucking fucking Justice League instead, a movie that deals with the real issues. So to finish off here, I'm aware that there is a slight difference between how politics has been handled so far in the MCU and how they're choosing to handle it with Captain Marvel. And that is that while I had to think a tiny bit to get those messages from previous movies, here I don't have to, because it's more to do with the advertising. Not what Brie Larson said, like in the movie and the advertising, what is the agenda being pushed? That women can be superheroes. It's so on the nose because, like mentioned, it's a movie for little girls. It's inspiring to them, it's not anti-man, it's just very pro-woman. And if you're mad that the movie is telling you that it's pro-woman, then there's something wrong with you and not the movie. I'm all for equal rights for the gays, I mean, the women. Just don't force it down my throat. Well, if you decided not to see the movie, then nothing's being forced down your throat. Yet.